somewhere inside the Kremlin. There is one weapon that Putin has always treated as something close to untouchable, and it was never a tank or a missile at all, but a shield built to stop everything else from ever reaching him. For decades, Russia poured billions of dollars into building the S-300 and the S-400. Air defense networks so advanced that Moscow turned them into a global sales pitch, selling the same systems to Turkey, to India, to China, marketing them as the closest thing on Earth to an impenetrable dome. These systems were built to track fighter jets screaming through the sky at twice the speed of sound, to catch cruise missiles skimming low over terrain, to intercept warheads falling from the edge of space at Mach 5. For years, almost nobody seriously questioned whether Russia could actually see a threat coming long before it ever arrived, because the entire reputation of these systems had been built on exactly that kind of certainty. Then, in May 2026, a 12-second video appeared online, and within hours, that reputation started quietly falling apart. The footage shows something almost absurdly simple. A large white balloon floating in total silence, nearly 5 miles above the Earth, roughly 26,000 feet up, high enough that the air around it sits at nearly minus 40 degrees. Hanging beneath that balloon is a small, sleek object. And then, without warning, a tiny mechanism clicks open. The object falls free. For 1 full second, there's nothing but silence. An engine ignites a moment later, and the object glides away smoothly, heading east, directly toward Russian-controlled territory, as calmly as if it had every right to be there. That object was a strike drone, and the machine that carried it past one of the most expensive defense networks on the planet cost, by most estimates, somewhere around $200 to build. Retired Colonel Viktor Kevliuk of Ukraine's Center for Defense Strategies said something afterward that Russia has still, to this day, never publicly disputed. He said Russian air defense has no cost-effective answer for any of it. There was no formal denial from Moscow, no official rebuttal, and no angry press conference insisting the system still performed exactly as advertised. There was only silence from a government that had spent decades telling the entire world that its air defense network was the very best that money could buy. To understand exactly why a piece of party balloon technology managed to embarrass one of the most feared military powers on Earth, you first need to see precisely what Ukraine actually built, and why doubling a weapon's range was never really the point. What Ukraine actually tested that day wasn't some experimental prototype cobbled together in secret. It was a straightforward idea, executed with almost insulting simplicity. A drone called the Hornet, roughly 7 feet long, guided by artificial intelligence, gets hung beneath a simple helium balloon. The balloon lifts it high into the sky, carries it forward, and then releases it to fly the rest of the way completely on its own. According to the published test data, the balloon carried that drone approximately 42 kilometers before releasing it at an altitude of roughly 8,250 meters, and where it continued gliding toward the Russian front line. On its own, launched from the ground, the Hornet has an effective range of somewhere between 100 and 150 kilometers. Add the balloon, and Ukrainian sources say that range can stretch to as much as 300 kilometers, effectively doubling how far this single drone can reach into Russian-held territory. Here's the number that actually explains how that's possible. When the drone separated from the balloon, it still had approximately 95% of its battery remaining. The balloon had done every bit of the heavy lifting, carrying the weapon to altitude for free, using nothing but wind and helium, while the drone's own engine sat completely idle the entire way up. Now, before going any further, it's worth being precise about exactly what this footage actually shows, because getting this wrong would undersell how clever this really is. This was a test, filmed and released deliberately by Ukraine to demonstrate the concept, not confirmed combat footage of one specific strike hitting one specific target. But make no mistake, this is not some theoretical concept still sitting on a whiteboard. The exact same Hornet drone has already been confirmed, hitting real Russian targets, striking supply routes and logistics deep behind the front lines in Donetsk, near Mariupol, and along the transport corridor connecting occupied Crimea to occupied parts of Kherson region. Ukraine has effectively developed a missile system that wind carries into Russia for absolutely free. The company actually building this drone deserves its own moment of attention, because it isn't some small Ukrainian workshop operating out of a garage. The Hornet is made by a company called Perennial Autonomy, founded by Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, building on two earlier drone ventures he'd already launched inside Ukraine. Just last month, that same company won what's being described as the largest counter-drone contract award in American military history, reportedly worth up to $500 million. So here's where most people watching this story get the point completely wrong, and it's worth correcting immediately, because the real breakthrough isn't the one everybody assumes it is. It's tempting to look at these numbers and think Ukraine simply found a clever way to stretch a drone's fuel tank a little further. That's not actually what makes Russian commanders nervous. The real advantage has nothing to do with range at all. It's about becoming invisible during the one part of the journey that used to be the most dangerous. A drone launched straight from the ground crosses the front line low and slow, exactly the kind of target Russian radar is built to catch early, track continuously, and shoot down long before it ever reaches anything worth hitting. A balloon-carried drone skips that entire exposed window completely. It rides up silently, drifts across the border completely undetected, and only switches its engine on once it's already deep inside enemy territory. At altitude, closing in on a target that was previously considered safely out of reach. Which raises the obvious question that should be keeping Russian air defense crews awake right now. If a system that costs tens of billions of dollars to build genuinely cannot reliably see a slow-moving balloon drifting silently overhead, what exactly was all that money actually protecting against? To understand why Russia's answer to all of this has been silence rather than confidence, you need to understand what the S-300 and S-400 were actually built to hunt in the first place. Every radar dish, every tracking algorithm, every engagement sequence baked into these systems was engineered around one specific kind of enemy. Something fast, something hot, something loud enough to scream across the sky and announce itself the moment it appears. A fighter jet tearing through the air at twice the speed of sound bounces a massive amount of energy straight back at a radar dish. A cruise missile streaking in low does the same. Even a ballistic warhead falling at Mach 5 from the edge of space gives these systems exactly the kind of target they were designed to catch. A balloon drifting silently at roughly 60 kilometers an hour, carried along by nothing but the wind, is almost the exact opposite of everything these radars were built to notice. Here's the number that actually explains the gap. Russia's primary long-range radar on the S-400, known as the 91N6, or Big Bird, is designed to reliably detect targets with a radar signature of roughly 0.4 square meters or larger at extended range. A typical weather balloon returns a signature somewhere between 0.001 and 0.01 square meters. That's up to 400 times smaller than what this multi-billion-dollar radar system was ever built to reliably pick up. And it gets worse from there, because the very tool Russian operators rely on to keep their screens clean actually works against them here. Most modern air defense radars use something called Doppler filtering, a technique built specifically to strip out slow-moving clutter like birds, rain clouds, and drifting debris so that operators aren't drowning in meaningless noise every single shift. A balloon moving at wind speed is, mathematically speaking, almost indistinguishable from a passing rain cloud. The exact filter designed to clean up the picture is the same filter erasing the balloon from it entirely. Now, you might assume the obvious fix here is simple. Just build a more sensitive radar, or switch off that filter, and the problem goes away. It doesn't work that way, and this is where Russia genuinely finds itself stuck. Turn that filtering off, and Russian screens instantly fill with thousands of false returns. Birds, storm fronts, wind-blown debris, drowning out the real threats operators actually need to see. There is no simple software patch here. This is a fundamental design trade-off baked into how every radar system on the planet works, and Ukraine found the exact seam where that trade-off turns into a weapon. And Ukraine didn't stop at exploiting invisibility. According to reporting from Euromaidan Press and analysis by Defense Blog, Ukraine has reportedly developed at least one more balloon variant, this time without a drone, designed to do something almost cruel to the Russian radar operators watching their screens. This version carries no drone, no explosive, nothing dangerous at all. Instead, it carries a simple piece of folded metal called a corner reflector, weighing less than a kilogram and costing roughly $20 to produce. That small folded piece of metal can amplify a balloon's radar signature by a factor of thousands, transforming an ordinary party balloon into something that suddenly appears on Russian screens the size of a strategic bomber. Picture the operator sitting behind that radar console. One moment, the screen shows nothing worth worrying about. The next, it shows what looks exactly like an aircraft the size of a Tu-160 closing in from the west, and there is genuinely no way for that operator to know, in the seconds available to make a decision, whether they're looking at a real bomber or $20 worth of folded aluminum drifting on a breeze. That single piece of hardware turns every Russian radar screen into a guessing game, and guessing games in air defense come with a price tag attached to every wrong answer. That price tag is exactly where Ukraine's advantage becomes almost impossible for Russia to counter, because this entire campaign isn't built around one clever weapon. It's built around three separate tools, stacked together, each one creating its own distinct kind of nightmare for the people staring at those radar screens. Start with the cheapest one, and the one that does the most damage purely through psychology. That decoy balloon fitted with the corner reflector costs roughly $200 total to build. It carries no warhead, it cannot hurt anyone. Its entire job is to force a Russian operator into an impossible decision within seconds, fire, or hold on a target that might be nothing more than plastic and foil. Before we move forward, if you enjoy our in-depth analysis, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now compare that $200 decision to what firing actually costs. A single S-300 interceptor missile runs approximately $1 million. The longer-range S-400 interceptor climbs to somewhere between $2 and $3 million per shot. That's a cost ratio of roughly 5,000 to 1. Ukraine has reportedly already launched more than 1,000 of these balloons into Russian airspace. Here's why that ratio matters even more than it looks on paper. Each S-400 battery can only track and engage a limited number of targets simultaneously, roughly 36 at once. Every single interceptor Russia burns, chasing down a $20 piece of folded metal, is one fewer engagement slot available the moment a real drone, a real missile, or a real dart happens to be flying in alongside it. Ukraine isn't just draining Russia's missile stockpile, it's draining Russia's attention, one impossible decision at a time. The second tool in this arsenal you already know, the Hornet drone riding the balloon to altitude before gliding in on its own power. And by now you understand exactly why removing that exposed launch window matters so much. But it's the third weapon in Ukraine's arsenal that represents something genuinely unlike anything fielded in this war so far, and it strikes directly at the one advantage Russia still believes it holds over Ukrainian technology: its electronic warfare network. This weapon is called the DART, developed by Ukraine's Center for Innovative Technologies, and it's important to be upfront that this system has not yet completed Ukraine's official military codification. The company built DART to drop from a balloon rather than fire from a plane or a launcher as a cheap, silent, and electronic warfare-resistant vehicle to carry guided weapons deep into Russia. Every electronic warfare system Russia has spent billions building works the same fundamental way. It hunts for a signal, a radio link, a GPS connection, something transmitting information it can corrupt, spoof, or drown out entirely. The DART is engineered to defeat that entire approach through a method that sounds almost too simple to work. It launches under normal guided flight, carried by balloon into the lower stratosphere, then descends under standard satellite navigation. Fully adjustable, fully steerable, exactly like any modern guided weapon. Then, at a specific altitude, everything shuts off. GPS receiver, gone. Navigation computer, gone. Every radio link, gone. The missile's control surfaces physically lock into position, and a solid fuel engine ignites, carrying the weapon the rest of the way to its target using nothing but raw physics. There is no signal left for Russian jammers to grab onto, because by that point, there simply isn't a signal at all. And the payload waiting inside that warhead adds one more layer to the problem. Rather than exploding on impact, the dart is designed to release thousands of ultra-thin carbon filaments across power substations and high-voltage lines, triggering catastrophic short circuits that can knock out an entire section of Russia's electrical grid for hours or even days without a single visible explosion. It's a concept the United States and NATO actually used once before, back in 1999, against Serbian power infrastructure, though that earlier version required a manned aircraft flying directly over defended airspace to deliver it. Ukraine's version needs no pilot, no aircraft, and no airspace clearance at all, just a balloon, the wind, and an off switch. Stack all three of these tools together, and you start to see exactly why Russia has stopped arguing about whether this threat is real. A $20 decoy that drains a multi-million-dollar missile stockpile. A drone that arrives with almost a full battery after slipping past the one window it used to be caught in. And a missile built specifically to make jamming itself obsolete. None of it required inventing new physics. It just required someone finally pointing weapons at a gap that had been sitting wide open the entire time. Everything you've just learned about balloons, decoys, and an unjammable missile might sound like a story Russia could quietly downplay behind closed doors. Except Russia didn't get that chance, because on the 13th of July, 2026, Russia's own Federal Security Service, the FSB, stood in front of the world's cameras and said the quiet part out loud. The FSB announced it had uncovered and stopped a planned attack targeting two Russian military airfields, Ukrainka, located in the Amur region near Russia's Pacific coast, and Shegel, sitting deep in the Ural Mountains near Chelyabinsk. Now, to be completely fair and accurate here, Russia is not claiming this attack succeeded. The FSB says it caught the plot before it happened and arrested the people it says were involved. But here's what actually matters, and it's bigger than whether this one specific plan worked. According to the FSB's own account, Ukrainian intelligence services used drones and balloons to smuggle containers of assembled attack drones into Bryansk Oblast, a Russian border region much closer to Ukraine. From there, according to Russia's own version of events, those components were driven the rest of the way across the country, hidden inside trailers with false bottoms, buried under ordinary household appliances, then quietly assembled inside rented garages sitting near the target airfields themselves. Sit with the geography of that claim for a moment, because Russia said this about itself, not Ukraine and not any Western government. Ukrainka airfield sits roughly 6,500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, a distance close to flying from London to New York, and it happens to host Russia's Tu-95 strategic bombers, the same long-range aircraft used to launch cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities as part of Russia's nuclear triad. Whether or not this exact attempt actually reached that far is genuinely something only Russia's own security service can verify. But ask yourself why the Kremlin would choose to publicize this story at all. A government confident that balloons pose no real threat doesn't hold a press conference naming its own nuclear bomber base as a target Ukraine was allegedly trying to reach. Russia chose to tell the world exactly how seriously it takes this threat, and it did so voluntarily, in its own words, on its own state media. The FSB added one more detail worth pulling out on its own. The drones intercepted during this operation were reportedly fitted with neural network control modules manufactured in Britain, the United States, Canada, and Sweden, specifically designed to resist Russian jamming. Whatever the full truth of this specific plot turns out to be, Russia is now openly telling its own population that Western technology, carried by balloon and drone across thousands of kilometers, has become something its security services genuinely fear. That fear shows up in far more than press statements. Satellite imagery and open source tracking analyzed by ISW point to Russia physically repositioning entire S-300 and S-400 batteries away from the Kola Peninsula, the remote Arctic region that guards Russia's strategic nuclear submarine fleet, and moving them south toward Moscow instead. Pulling air defense away from a nuclear submarine base to fight balloons is not the decision of a country that considers this threat manageable. Moscow itself tells the same story from the ground up. New Pantsir, S-1 short-range systems have reportedly been installed on rooftops and towers, forming a defensive ring roughly 40 kilometers around the city center. Built specifically to catch low-altitude threats slipping in underneath the coverage of Russia's larger, more expensive systems. Add up everything Russia has spent chasing this problem: the repositioned batteries, the new rooftop systems, and the interceptors already burned on decoy balloons, and you're looking at a bill running into the hundreds of millions of dollars deployed against a program that, according to Ukrainian sources, has cost roughly $200,000 in total materials to build more than 1,000 balloons. Somewhere in Moscow, someone is running that math right now, and none of it adds up in Russia's favor. All of this leads to a single, uncomfortable question sitting at the center of this entire story. If Russia can spend hundreds of millions of dollars chasing this threat, why can't it actually fix the underlying problem? The honest answer is that this was never really a problem Russia's engineers could solve, because the real advantage sitting behind everything you've just watched has nothing to do with technology at all. It's the wind. The prevailing westerly winds across this stretch of Europe, blowing steadily from roughly 40 to 60 degrees north latitude, are not something Ukraine invented or discovered. They're a permanent feature of Earth's atmosphere, the same circulation pattern that has shaped weather across the continent for millions of years, blowing in exactly one dominant direction, west to east, long before either Ukraine or Russia existed as nations at all. And there's a detail buried in this story that confirms just how permanent that advantage really is. Russia reportedly tried launching balloons of its own in response. According to Ukrainian military sources, those Russian balloons drifted straight back over Russian territory. Moscow tried to copy the tactic and watched its own atmosphere hand the advantage right back to Ukraine. If any of this feels like an entirely new idea in warfare, it genuinely isn't, and history already ran a version of this exact experiment once before. During the Second World War, Japan launched approximately 9,000 balloon bombs toward North America, riding the Pacific jet stream across nearly 9,000 kilometers of open ocean. Roughly 300 of those balloons actually made it across, and 6 Americans lost their lives when one detonated in Oregon, the only combat deaths to occur on the continental United States during the entire war. The American government's response at the time was total silence, a complete press blackout, specifically so Japan would never learn its program was actually working. Russia in 2026 doesn't have that luxury. There is no information blackout capable of surviving millions of Telegram channels, independent journalists, and satellite trackers watching every single balloon that lifts off from Ukrainian soil. The wind that once carried fire across an ocean in near total secrecy is now carrying weapons in full public view, and everyone, including Russia's own security services, is watching it happen in real time. Ukraine's balloon campaign has quietly proved that a piece of physics costing $200 can outmaneuver a shield that cost $50 billion to build. It proved that Russia cannot sanction the jet stream, cannot arrest the wind, and cannot patch a filter designed into the fundamental physics of how radar itself actually works. So here's where this actually leaves things heading into whatever comes next in this war. Ukraine didn't invent the atmosphere, and it didn't discover some secret law of physics no one else had ever noticed. It simply found the one weapon Russia had never bothered pointing its billion-dollar shield at because nobody ever imagined the wind itself could be aimed. The real question now isn't whether Russia can build a better radar. It's whether any amount of money can ever truly defend against something that was blowing across this exact stretch of sky long before either country existed, and will keep blowing long after this war finally ends. The sky isn't the only place Russia's map is quietly falling apart either. On the ground, one of Moscow's closest remaining footholds in Europe is starting to look just as exposed as its radar screens, and that's exactly what we broke down in our last video. We showed you the brutal, deliberate move Poland just made specifically to cut around Kaliningrad, tightening the noose on the one piece of Russian territory sitting isolated inside NATO's own backyard. If a $200 balloon can quietly humiliate a $50 billion air shield, wait until you see what a single, calculated decision on the ground is already doing to Russia's most vulnerable outpost in Europe. Go watch it next, because both stories are really pointing at the same uncomfortable truth for Moscow. There is no direction left, air or land, where the map is still working in Russia's favor. This is the Frontline Show, and this war is moving faster than almost anyone is prepared for. We'll see you in the next one.